Welcome to Joint Session, Diverse Voices in New York State Cannabis. I'm Herb Barbot, former and first Director of Operations at the New York State Office of Cannabis Management. This podcast brings together policymakers, regulators, licensees, advocates, and industry leaders to talk through the realities of building a cannabis market in New York and what those lessons might mean beyond the state. In Season 3, we continue the conversation while we celebrate the 5th anniversary of the Marijuana Regulation and Taxation Act. We look at how policy translates into practice and how practice may impact policy. Through it all, businesses must navigate change, all while trying to prepare for where the industry may be headed next. We aim to bring you thoughtful, candid discussions about what's working, what's evolving, and what still needs to be figured out. Thanks for joining us, and now here's the episode. Nicole Ricci is a licensed New York microbusiness cannabis operator. She's a cultivator with over 30 years of experience who also leads New York Small Pharma, a nonprofit founded in 2019 to advance a socially just, economically inclusive, and environmentally regenerative cannabis community. New York Small Pharma advocates for small farmers, legacy operators, and equity licensees through science-based policy leadership, education, and an equity-focused cultivation incubator. As host of the state's largest craft grower gathering and Flower Cup, New York Small Pharma connects growers, retailers, and consumers to build an equitable, sustainable market rooted in community and environmental stewardship. Prior to all of this, Nicole was a U.S. State Department negotiator, including working as head of the U.S. Delegation on Sustainable Fisheries at the UN General Assembly. Welcome, Nicole. How are you today?
I'm good, Herb. Thanks so much for having me. I'm really honored to be a part of this.
Oh, well, thank you. So, Nicole, from fisheries to cannabis, please tell us a little bit more about your journey into the cannabis industry and what drew you to become a licensed microprocessor in New York State.
That's a big question, Herb. Let's see. I started growing cannabis when I was very young, and my dad was a business owner, and I saw how hard he worked as a business owner, and he never got to take the day off. And I was really enamored with Jacques Cousteau and the environment, so I decided to go into marine biology. And eventually was hired by the federal government. I had, most of my career, actually all of my career was in the federal government before moving over to cannabis. And so I grew because I didn't want to get caught purchasing. So I honed my growing skills as a government employee.
All right. So, and how did that, then how did you get into the cannabis industry? And again, your interest in becoming a microprocessor in the state?
You're right. Thank you for that. Sorry. So I left the government and I took a job out in California. It was a really bad fit. So I decided to move back home. And at that point, my parents were getting older. And so I decided I really wanted to stay in New York, my home state, and spend time with them. When I quit my job in California, I started looking into legal cannabis and what all was involved. At that point, the California market hadn't really changed as it did when it started out. It was just a medical program. It was actually pretty amazing. You could make money at it as a grower, growing for the dispensaries. And then when I came home around 2014, I started paying attention to New York, and I realized New York could actually pass legalization. And we thought we got close a couple times, but it wasn't until 21 that we actually got it over the goalpost. So I started becoming involved in New York cannabis in 2015. Eventually, I started working with the hemp growers, and then eventually with New York Small Pharma in 2020. So the year before it legalized, I worked with New York Small Pharma. And, once we became involved, this is probably a longer answer than what you hoped, but, New York Small Pharma's plan, I really liked working with them because they were environmentally focused, which was important to me. They had a social justice focus, which was really important to me. And so, sorry, I'm a little nervous. So
You're doing great.
Our goal in New York Small Pharma was to get regenerative in the law, which we did, was to get climate change in the law, and to get home grow in the law. And we also expanded the definition of distressed farmer, thanks to some really great people that were working on in the legislative branch. And we were just going to ride off into the sunset and teach home grow. That, we didn't really care at all about commercialization of cannabis. We just cared about the fact that the plant was free and that everyone would have access to it. And then before, as soon as the law passed, of course, everyone got out their pen and edited the law and created a conditional program out of nowhere that had zero to do with social justice. It was all about the state trying to make amends for the failed hemp program, without changing the gameplay. So they made, we had a lot of arguments with that time with Axel Barnaby saying, you're running the same play. These people are going to be led down the same path, which they told us we were crazy. And lo and behold, that's exactly what happened. There was no place to take it to market. But we were so concerned by the lack of social justice in this conditional bill that we decided we really couldn't ride off into the sunset, that our work was still needed here. So at that point, I had become president of New York Small Pharma. Some of our founders went to work for OCM, some just retired. And then it was sort of devolved to me, and I took us into the regulatory process. And then through working with the regulators and, helping create the CCTM program, which was largely a failure because the state didn't honor the promises of the CCTM program.
Can you describe what the CCTM program was and what you expected from it?
Yeah. So because the hemp farmers got a golden ticket for the very fact that they were hemp farmers and no other reason, we felt that all of the people that had been growing cannabis and keeping the culture alive over the years after we were all chased indoors in the 80s, and, through especially the, Black and brown community who really bore the brunt of enforcement, we felt really slighted that all the hemp farmers were given this golden ticket. And so we really wanted to create a pathway that would help those legacy growers be able to identify themselves to the government and give themselves a little bit of advantage for their years of keeping this culture alive. And that was the Cannabis Compliance Training and Mentorship Program, which was supposed to be its own thing. I think eventually OCM tried to tie it to the AUCC obligations, which they never met. They were supposed to have a mentorship program, which they never did do, but yet they all got to transfer over anyway. It's not their fault that the program didn't happen. It's entirely the state's fault. But so we created this CCTM program, and no one was ever promised a license. That was never, obviously that would not be appropriate. That wouldn't be something that we were engaged in. But if you could definitively prove that you grew and that you had a knowledge of cannabis, or whether you moved significant weight, even, you would qualify for this program, provided that you could prove it. And now what the steps that OCM took to prove it, I don't know, but we helped craft the curriculum of the program so that those who were coming into a regulatory process could understand the difference it would take to bring your product to market. Because a lot of growers don't understand. They think, I'm a great grower, I grow fire, game over. But in fact, there's in the license, which is true in the natural, in the legacy market, but when you bring that into a regulatory framework and you now have to get that package, to the point of sale through a bunch of hurdles and requirements and specific things that you can and can't do, it's quite expensive to move it to market. A lot of legacy growers don't even really cure. They dry, maybe some cure for a little bit, but their product moves so quickly, it's not sitting on shelves for months. So it's an entirely different game in the legal market. And so we wanted them to understand that. And then through that understanding, in the same way that hemp farmers got this, expedited path to become license holders, we wanted those individuals that went through the CCTM program to get that expedited path through an expedited review, which is all we ever asked for, which is what OCM guaranteed to us over and over again. And for that reason is why I eventually became a microbusiness, along with, I think, everyone else that became a microbusiness, because of this reliance on OCM's word of what a microbusiness would be, and what taking the time, giving up extremely vulnerable information about your finances, about your location, everything. Like, people put that, a lot of people were like, don't trust the government, the smart ones. And I was like, no, they're really here to help. They were supposed to get that in return, and they've been completely slighted. And now with all the lawsuits, OCM GC is unwilling to even discuss a path forward.
So today, what are the 2 or 3 most pressing issues that New York Small Farmer is, currently advocating for on behalf of cannabis cultivators?
Well, so there's a lot of pressing issues. Unfortunately, none, But I would say the biggest ones on our plate right now are trying to realize the CCTM program, which is sort of a non-starter because OCM won't discuss on it, but what can you do but keep pushing? The other one is the micro business license, which we're told that they would be able to have on-farm stands. They would be able to, you know, cater weddings. They would be able to do public and private events. They would be able to do delivery in the same way Card was able to do delivery before they got their storefronts in order to make the money to afford their storefronts. And, you know, OCM has chosen, to be clear, choice to interpret the MRTA in a way that requires all of these small micros to have a storefront in order to operate. And so we're trying to get the legislators to clarify that. Like, was it truly the legislators' intent? You know, if you talk to anyone who opened up a dispensary in New York State, they're not going to tell you it's a small lift and it's not capital intensive. They're going to tell you it's a huge lift, it's capital intensive. It sometimes takes years to find a location to get everything to line up. Card have been languishing for 5 years. So to think that your smallest cohort of licenses, the ones that were supposed to come from the communities disproportionately impacted, supposed to come from the Black communities, the brown communities, the women, these people that are marginalized in agriculture, marginalized in business, marginalized in society, are supposed to come forward with the largest amount of capital to be able to run a full cultivation facility, a full processing facility, and a full retail facility. Like, is that truly how our legislators think? Is that how out of touch they are with reality? Or were they expecting something else? And if they were expecting something else, why can't they clarify that? Not change anything, but simply clarify the law so that as OCM leadership consistently changes, we're not having constant new interpretation of that law, but a clear, definitive implementation of the letter and spirit of the law. That's what we're asking for. And you would think we were asking for blood from a stone. They're willing to sponsor laws that, you know, expand canopy based on the year that you farmed, that let you change license type depending on the license you have in your hand, like zero criteria based craziness that they're willing to sponsor. But when it comes to, you know, they want to expand the state advisory board, which hands out money to the communities disproportionately impacted. They want to expand that to give the ROs a seat on it. Yeah, but they aren't willing to simply clarify the words that are there. So it's quite perplexing.
So why do you think that is? Why is the agency not being responsive to your goals?
Well, it's not my goals. It's the goals of 400 and plus microbusiness licenses, of which less than 10% have actually been able to open storefronts because it's incredibly difficult. And those that haven't been able to actually, very few of them, there are some, but very few of them have been actually able to grow and operate a storefront because of the capital and resource intensity of running a storefront. They don't have the bandwidth to do both. And so it's not New York Small Pharma, it's over 90% of every single microbusiness license holder that is suffering from this. The biggest impediment is the governor, period. If the governor was supportive of an economic development program for cannabis, she would direct her general counsel to find a way. They're choosing to interpret it. They can interpret it however they want. That interpretation is based on fear and stigma, which it looks very apparent to, I think, most anyone paying attention, that the governor also herself is driven by fear and stigma and not supportive of an economic development program for cannabis, not supportive of an environmental lens over cannabis, and not supportive of really finding a way for small businesses and agricultural revitalization through cannabis.
Now,
You worked at OCM. Would you disagree, Herb? How did you find the governor when you worked at OCM?
I love the governor.
It's true that if you criticize Governor Hochul, it tends to have repercussions. And so we're not trying to be critical of Governor Hochul. I don't know who advises Governor Hochul. I don't know, you know, she's a governor of an incredibly important state in our country. Not that any other state is more important, but New York State has the stock exchange. We have, you know, we're a very visible state, and cannabis is not at the top of her agenda, clearly, of what she needs to manage, rightfully so. So I don't know the type of advice that she's getting, but it seems that it's not the correct advice.
All right. So let me just on a different tack. So licensed cultivators have faced enormous pressure from the illicit market. How significant is that problem today? And what do you believe needs to happen at the state level, again, to address it?
So this is a tough question for me to answer because for all you listeners out there, my opinion is not the norm. Um, but I don't think that the answer, so the licensed market is facing pressure from the illicit market. The illicit market is doing 5 to 6 times better than the licensed market, just to let you know how we're doing. And they face pressure from stores that popped up because now it's legal and people don't know what is a real store and what isn't a real store. They face pressure just from the regular, illicit market that continues to move the way that it always moved, which was not usually through storefront. They face pressure inside the licensed market where you have product coming from out of state that's being inverted, or even grown in state that's being inverted. Inverted just means like you're taking product that wasn't grown necessarily under legal recognition and putting it into legal bags and selling it at the dispensaries. Some dispensaries are, bringing in product directly themselves. Harder now with Metric for sure. So yes, there are a lot of pressures, but is the answer? So we've had a very New York had some of the most austere prohibition policies. The Rockefeller policies were some of the most racist and austere of all the policies. Bloomberg had the stop and frisk. It was largely started by marijuana. So, like, has punitive approach to cannabis worked in this state or in this country? I think you would have to look at the data and say no, it hasn't. So why would we continue down that path to try to curb something that we've never been able to curb? And in fact, we've now had to make it legal because we realized, oh yeah, it's a plant, we were wrong all along. So I think to continue down that same path that hasn't worked before is probably going to continue not to work. But, I'm no genius, but that's just my guess. So I would really recommend that the state focus on making the licensed cannabis space a viable, lucrative, successful space, because without that, people are never going to stop gaming the system. People are never going to stop trying to feed their family or themselves. You know what I mean? That's just the nature of life. So I think the state needs to focus more on fixing the problems in the licensed market long before they start pointing the finger at the illicit market, who they could take a note or two from, because they are doing 5 to 6 times better than the legal market.
All right. So for those licensed cultivators, right, the regulatory and compliance burden, we know can be immense. So what are some of the rules or requirements that you feel are disproportionately hurting small and micro business licensees? And and also this is relevant as OCM begins their listening tour.
Well, I mean, it's pages and pages. For micro specifically, obviously the storefront requirement, the 25-mile limit that they pulled out of the air that they created, which is a complete arbitrary and capricious regulation. There is zero justification, scientific, health, public safety to justify 25 miles. There is issues with lab testing. They have caps on terpenes, and yes, I would agree that you want to put caps on sprayed terpenes or added terpenes or artificial. But if your plant has terpenes that it's tested with, it'll fail if it hits a certain level, even if it's a natural occurring terpene. Like, that type of thing is a bit ridiculous. There's issues with Metric where micro businesses are required to have 4 different licenses under the Metric system versus just one license. So you have one tag number 5 for C1, one tag number 5 for P1, one tag number 5 for DX1, one tag number 5 for D1. It's very easy to make mistakes in that, which is why we really caution on this punitive pathway, because everything is so not well put together that error is high, especially for the micros. Micro businesses are held to the exact same tax and regulation and compliance standards as the registered organizations and the retailers, but we're a tiny little operation. So all of those regulations, there's no regulations that are looking at environment, impact of energy, as we see AI exploding and loss of water, like that all really matters. So there's a lot of expenses that are, we have to put up New York Small Farmer promotes regenerative grow, which is working with nature. Agriculture knows that you have to let land lie fallow. You can't keep farming that same land over and over again, but yet we have to fence everything in So there's a slew of things in the regulations
Mhm.
that require money to be spent based entirely on fear. Metric tracks every single plant. We have to pay for every single tag,
Mhm.
and then Metric, there's no way to track a plant all the way through one plant. You can track at best a row of plants and say, I know that this batch came from this row, but to say it came from plant number 4, you know what I mean, or plant 30 or whatever in that row is near impossible. But yet we have to tag every plant and account for it. All of that impacts your employee, how many hours it requires to do that. It's all expensive. It all adds up and it becomes quite expensive.
But
And
yet,
it's all
but yet, Metric and OCM say that is entirely possible.
Well, Metric, the company that's making millions of dollars off of saying that's entirely possible,
Mhm.
claims it's entirely possible. That's shocking, isn't it?
Yeah.
Like, and OCM, who has put in these rules that don't make any sense, also feel it's entirely possible. I would like to see OCM prove it.
All right.
I want to see them definitively say this bud in this jar on this shelf here comes from plant number 9 in row 3. Show it to me.
All right.
Show me how you do it.
So now, pricing has been another pain point. Right? Cultivators are reportedly struggling to get, fair wholesale prices. So what's driving that? And do you have any solutions on the table?
So interestingly enough, we were just discussing this. New York Small Pharma started a coalition on the supply side. So, we're trying to bring our voices together in community to set our agendas in community to communicate with the regulators and legislators in community. And so wholesale pricing was something that came up, and wholesale pricing is a significant issue. And Kaylin Cassetter with Empire Cannabis Manufacturers Association is someone who's really leading on this issue and is much more fluent on it than I am. But just to break it down for you, if I walk into as a micro to a retailer, some retailers understand the plight of the small pharma and really want to support them. Other not that they don't understand or want to support, but they might not be as familiar with it. And what they do know are the ROs and the MSOs that have tons of money and teams and marketing. And so when we come in, they want us to offer them the lowest price. So I break it down old school. If you buy a certain volume, you get a price break. If you pay COD, you get a small percentage price break versus net 15 or 30. They want like the highest price break for the lowest volume, or they want, you to support their discounts that they run at the store. And so what that means is they put you in a position where they're negotiating the wholesale prices with you. And when that happens, you'll see that, this price is over here for this product, this price is over there for this product. And it creates sort of an instability in the market and an unfairness, because is this product priced for what it's
Mhm.
worth, or is this all just a game that we're playing? And you in liquor and other controlled regulated substances, you see this wholesale, price fixing is problematic. So is a lack of you know consistency in wholesale prices across the market. So we would like to see how it is similar in other industries where the wholesale price is set and it's posted, and then it can't be negotiated or changed at that time. If you choose to change it, you change it across the board, not store by store by store.
Mm. So now,
Does that
are
make
you
sense?
actually operating as a microprocessor today?
I am a micro business, so
I'm
I
sorry, yeah.
cultivate, process, distribute, and I don't retail because I don't want to own a store. That was not never my plan at this stage of the game.
So what does that day-to-day operation look like?
Well, I'm a mixed light micro, and so I largely at this stage of my cultivation build out grow with the season. So eventually I'd like to be 3 season, but I'm, at best 2 depending on what I plant. But so, you know, you're cultivating at some times of the year. The other times of the year, you're drying, curing, packaging, ordering packages, getting testing passed, going in and out of stores,
Mhm.
trying to understand metric, which came at the worst time of the day. And then, of course, with New York Small Pharma, I'm also running New York Small Pharma at the same time. I wouldn't recommend it to anyone. If you are on the legacy side, that is the place to
Mhm.
be. That's terrible to say. I hope the license market continues to improve, but it's micro business licenses for a lot of people are more of an expensive hobby than an actual viable business at this stage of the game.
Uh, so, how does your personal experience as a woman running a licensed cannabis business shape and inform the advocacy work that you're doing through New York Small Farmer?
That's an interesting question. I mean, I think that running a cannabis business as a female is more significant in the license side than it necessarily is in the not-profit side. You know, cannabis is a male-dominated field. There's a lot of misogyny. I mean, I'm certainly not speaking for every male. I have great friends in cannabis, have always on both sides of the licensed and non-licensed markets. You know, I'm not trying to pick on men in general. Men in general are lovely and wonderful, but there is a lot of, grow bro mentality, and it is difficult to be a female, especially, an older female in this market. It's not easy. There's a lot of misogyny, a lot of dismissal. You get, yeah, there's a lot, you get dismissed quite a bit. And it's somewhat true also in the not-for-profit as well.
Yeah, and now I know you have a lot of concerns, to say the least, about the way OCM operates and the decisions they've made. But if you could change one thing about the regulatory framework tomorrow, something that would have an immediate positive impact on small cultivators, micro businesses, what would it be and why?
So I want to take a little space to answer this question. I have been extremely critical of OCM leadership. OCM is, under new leadership, who seems to be a breath of fresh air and a new path. And we're excited to see John in this executive director position. We think Sue Filburn is fantastic as well. I really like her. Simone Washington, I had the chance to speak with her one-on-one the other day, and I think she's an amazing person. So please know that a lot of my critical comments have been of the past. I'm not in a position of judging this group yet. I've just met them, and they all seem incredible. So we're excited to be working with them. We also had the opportunity to meet a lot of staff at
Mhm.
the listening and learning session. And, all of us were outside going, those are the people on the other side of the email. They're not really. We deal mostly with licensing, but they are so lovely and aware of the work that we do and the plight that we're facing and the emails that we've sent. And it was really just uplifting to be able to meet them and hear them and see how much they really do care
Mhm.
and are engaged. So the number one thing, so now that I've been able to throw that,
No,
love
and
at,
I'm sure they'll appreciate that.
yeah, they are. I mean, I did not meet one person from the GC all the way down to the Social and Economic Equity Office um, staff. I did not meet one person that I wasn't incredibly impressed with and honored to meet. So I really appreciate those. And I think it was the last executive director that came up with this listening and learning tour,
Mm.
and it was cathartic in a sense to be able to get out there and explain your issues and see someone nod their head and take notes. It was almost like being in therapy. But the number so this is it really was. You can ask people. I use it like a therapy session. So the number one thing I would change is to create more of that. So the number one thing, if I was queen for the day and I could wave a wand and change it all, would be how the Cannabis Control Board, the CCB, operates. Currently, the CCB comes together, and under Jessica Garcia, the new chair, I will say I'm giving her kudos. She answers emails. Not that I'm recommending emailing her, but she also has more deliberation at the table than we've ever seen before. It was just gavel down, gavel down, gavel down, and we never knew really what was going on and why they were making the decisions because they never had any deliberation on camera. The audience, the stakeholders, are allowed to speak after the meeting is closed, after the decisions are made, and for 120 seconds. And I have to say, 120 seconds to discuss complex issues like this seems entirely like window dressing and nothing more. It doesn't seem like the listening and learning tour. It just seems like, here we're checking a box. Yeah, yeah, go ahead. And some people are up there crying, like, I haven't been able to pay, and like, time in the middle of these, heart wrenching speeches. So what I would like to see is a complete change to how that is operated. I think that they need an industry advisory panel, not expanding the state advisory panel. I think an industry advisory panel that is representative of the different sectors of industry and the geography of the state, that when they say, hey, we're thinking about rolling metric out at the end of the year before end of year quarterly taxes and holidays, what do you think of that? We can say, well, here's why that's a bad idea. And they can avoid
But that
things.
would be really more for OCM as opposed to the control board.
No, it would be a legislative change to how the CCB operates so that they have an industry advisory panel. So I came from the world of fisheries, and in the world of fisheries, much like cannabis, fish are a natural resource that you can't necessarily control. They're controlled by the elements, and fish have free will. Plants have limited free will. They can only drop a seed to move. Fish migrate everywhere. So how they're governed is they're governed by these quasi governmental bodies that are regionally located, and they have a science advisory panel, an industry advisory panel. So when rulemaking happens, that rule has to have a scientific lens to it. Is there going to be an environmental impact to this? What's the impact to the natural resource itself? Then it goes to an industry advisory panel, and they say, how is this going to implement on the ground? What is this going to mean to the processors? What is this going to mean to the cultivators? And then those two groups send their recommendations up to the council. And that's exactly the type of thing that I would think would work really well in cannabis. And so the community could come and sit in front of the science advisory panel and speak to why this is an environmental issue. Or they can sit in front of the industry advisory panel and say, hey, this is my experience in implementing this. And then they can pass that information along. And then before the CCB actually deliberates on a topic, the stakeholders would then be invited up to testify before the CCB, giving us at least 3 minutes to speak if you're an individual, or 6 minutes if you're an organization representing a greater number of individuals. And then when they make deliberations based on this input and based on this testimony from the community, which doesn't mean that they therefore agree or do what is being asked of them, but at least that information is on record. It's part of the rulemaking process, and it's part of the deliberations of the CCB, and they can address it in their deliberations. So I think is the number one change that I would create, because having that dialogue between those that are going to be actually executing these rules and those that are making the rules to make sure that these rules even make sense is key to a viable and robust industry.
No, I think it's a very good suggestion. So is there anything else that you'd like to raise that we didn't speak about today?
I would just like to talk a little bit about New York small pharma in general. If you would indulge me. New York small pharma, really didn't set out to be in the world of policy. I did 35 years of policy service at the feds. It's really not where we want to be. We really want to be in the science and research, and really looking at, bringing some scientific integrity into cannabis. Because of the illicit nature of it, there wasn't a lot of scientific background to breeding, to naming, nomenclature. Didn't have a lot of science. We don't even call something by its real name. Do we know these genetics are real? Like, all of that, I believe, being able to have greater data for the growers, that's really the area where New York small pharma wants to be, as well as creating an incubator to provide land access for, individuals that are, people of color, that are women, that are from communities disproportionately impacted, that are distressed farmers have land, but, people that have come into this space but don't have access to land, which largely are the Black and brown communities, which no one else is providing for them. And so I just encourage people to follow what it is that we're trying to do and to support us. We're entirely we're entirely volunteer operated, and we're entirely donation based. And, we could really use the support of the community in the work that we're trying to do if you support our mission.
All right. Well, thank you. Terrific. And so again, thank you, Nicole Ricci, New York State licensed microbusiness and president of New York Small Pharma. Thank you.
Thank you, Herb. Thank you so much.
That's it for this episode of Joint Session, Diverse Voices in New York State Cannabis. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave a rating and review on your favorite podcast platform. It helps more listeners find the show. In addition, please share this episode with colleagues, advocates, and anyone interested in the state of cannabis in New York. Joint Session is produced by me, Herb Barbot, together with executive producer Robert Curtis from Simlev. You can follow Joint Session on Instagram at jointsession.pod, on Blue Sky at jointsessionpod.bsky.social, and on LinkedIn at Joint Session Podcast. If you have any comments, questions, or suggestions on topics, reach out to me at herb.jointsession@gmail.com. Until next time, this is Herb Barbot. Thank you for listening.